Hello and welcome back to Joy in Our Town. I'm Deacon Adolfo Carbajal. I'm your host today, and today we're going to be having a wonderful little chat here with Bill Russell, the Director of Union Gospel Mission and dear friend.
Yeah, thank you.
Dear friend and supporter here at the TV station. And the issue that we're going to be talking about today is mental health. Oh, mental health, such a broad issue. And when we think about, people think about mental health, the very first idea that comes in is people that are all kind of messed up and stuff. But that's not necessarily the case.
No, we want to distance ourselves from being seen as mentally ill. Nobody wants that stigma. No one wants that title. And yet all of us struggle with some area of either depression or some area where we're not perceiving things really clearly. We're kind of disfocused. Maybe we're seeing things or hearing things that aren't really accurate. And so there's a huge spectrum of mental health that's different than a rather narrow spectrum of what's in the diagnosable areas of mental illness.
Yeah, you made that point that we don't have to suffer from schizophrenia, to see things and hear things that aren't there. Sometimes we do that by our own choice because we are, in essence, embodied spirits. And the embodiment may not be perfect, and it may have all these different little variations to it. But the essence of our spiritual nature, since it is of God, must be perfect.
So we have this dwelling in us. We have God's Spirit dwelling in us. We're made in His image. I think at this point, one of the gospel writers said, the flesh wars against the spirit. The flesh representing, he used the word sarx, which is kind of it's not our body, it's not our soma, it's not the essence of who we are. We just have these elements, chemicals in us. We have trauma and memories that are painful. We react to pain differently. I'll give you an example. A woman is married to a man for 15 years. And then she discovers that the man has been unfaithful to her. This is a horrible trauma. This will cause distrust that can easily be projected on other men. It could be taken way beyond, if he lied to me about this, how much else has he lied to me? All of a sudden, she could be distrusting everybody and everything. And so you can say, well, that could be a temporary mental issue. Yes, it is. It's got to be addressed. And you have to separate things rather carefully. And then what you're talking about is, it's very critical that a person then connects back to God and His Spirit and is allowed for the healing, clarity, truth, all the things that are, God is powerful, God is loving, God is truth, God is wise. So to reconnect to Him is to reconnect to His power, His love, His wisdom, and His knowledge. And that has a way of healing us spiritually, healing us mentally, even bringing physical healing, giving us wisdom about ways that we were designed. And these are so interrelated. Real quick story. A man who had some major trauma in his life and had some really bizarre responses to that trauma. I mean, his mind fractured and he had a mental meltdown when he was in his teens. You get the picture? Somebody died in his family. He reacted really extremely, had a mental breakdown when he was 13, 14. He was in a medical facility, and he's coming out of it. So he's coming out of it, and day by day, he's getting stronger, 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 and stronger. One day, he and his friends decide to watch a movie, and he takes a 1-liter bottle of a cola, a caffeinated sugar chemical cola, and he drinks that. Now, we might say that's unwise. Physically, that's unwise. It's a lot of sugar. It's a lot of caffeine. It's a lot of unknown chemicals we can't prescribe.
People do it in theaters all the time.
But they do it. They get the big gulps of the Jankos. But for him, Adolfo, it caused a chain reaction that is bio, psycho, spiritual, social. He ends up hospitalized for about 6 months because the chemical reaction in his mind played back to that flesh that caused him to misperceive things. He went into paranoia. He went into massive depression. He took more substances, more coke to try to feel alive.
Self-medicating.
Yeah, and it just, and so you don't look at Pepsi or coke as a bad drug, but in this case, it just separated him from mental wellness, from clear thinking, and because it was a fragile system. So we have loved ones, and we get embarrassed for them, or we ourselves can be having a real bad stretch, and we want to pull back, and we don't want people to see us like this because it's embarrassing. So we tend to suffer from depression or suspicion and really overthinking things and seeing things that aren't there. We tend to do this silently alone, and it's absolutely the opposite of what's needed for good mental health. You need another human's perspective. You need wisdom from God, usually in human form, to come back and get solid, good counsel, wise counsel. In a multitude of wise counselors, not ungodly counselors. Psalm 1 says, do not walk in the counsel of the ungodly. But Proverbs also said it is in a multitude of wise counselors, there's wisdom, there's safety, there's life. So you have to go to the right source, and you have to get that patient, re-clarifying,
that wisdom idea that what we read in like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes seems to do that.
Yeah. You could look at Elijah after all this trauma and everything happened up on Mount Carmel, and then Jezebel, the wicked queen, says, I'm going to kill you. And he freaks out and he runs away. He runs all the way down to the mountain of God. He ran to the right place. Along the way, God said, I need you to sleep. I need you to eat. I need you to sleep again. Before he ever came up to the mountain, he was in the wilderness. God said, sleep, eat, sleep, eat, sleep, eat. Okay, now come up to the mountain. I don't think God wanted to have anything to do with him until he was well rested and his biology was working again. Because, downtown at Union Gospel Mission, if a man or a woman are psychotic out on the street, I can go try to reason with them, but really, the most compassionate and loving thing I could do is to encourage them to find rest and to find food and to get their kind of emotional, physical, mental feet under them. Then we can have a talk and start tracking them toward long-term trauma-informed help that's going to work for them. We've infused our operation with godly mental health professionals who know how to do trauma-informed stuff that's gentle and therapeutic, and it's not harsh, it's not condemning, it's not shame-based. You don't just yell at them and tell them they're crazy and tell them to stop it. You realize there's a reason why this is happening.
When we think about our mental health or anything that's mental, we think about that big organ that's sitting in the middle of our skulls. You have that biological aspect, and what I hear you saying is that the relationship between our embodiment and our true spiritual nature has to function together in a synergistic kind of way.
Absolutely.
And when different things like this take place in our lives, just like a person who is addicted to substance abuse uses it to self-medicate themselves with whatever, even if we're not addicted to substance abuse, the creation of our own egos and those projections that we create are a type of self-medication. You talked early on about how the body wars against the spirit, or perhaps maybe that's like the ego, that is in and of itself just a false projection of the body, and the warring is because it is struggling to survive, even though it really doesn't exist. And so that spiritual health, that spiritual awareness, and again, what I'm hearing you say, is necessary for us to begin to let this other thing eventually dissolve away, and we connect with our true self.
Right.
And that begins the whole process.
Yeah.
Resting, eating,
Yes.
everything else before we can enter into the cave and discern the Word of God in just a god-awful storm.
Yeah, I think at this point, there's a man I know who, in his foolish days, I'll say it that way, consumed a lot of methamphetamines. And biologically, when you consume methamphetamines, they produce dopamine in your brain. And dopamine is a toxic substance. It's meant by God to be dosed out in little drops, and it goes into dopamine sensors in our brain, and it creates massive amounts of pleasure. So if we eat a good meal, little drops of dopamine say, I feel well. You know, when serotonin comes, it makes us sleepy or whatever, but there's this excitement, reproduction, sexuality. God designed that to be rewarding for the promotion of our race, and so and dogs have the same dopamine too to promote their race, and so little bits are dosed out. When you do methamphetamine, a massive amount is dumped out into your brain, 4 times what sexual experience is, and so. What is your brain? The dopamine receptors can't take it all in. It puddles up. When it puddles up, it's toxic, so it damages the tissues. You're destroying that which God meant to be good. And then when it can't take it in, it floats around your brain. And what does it do? It makes you crazy. Methamphetamine, meth-induced psychosis, is a chemical reaction to having toxins in your brain, plus the other stuff that was mixed with the meth, and you get crazy, you do irrational things. Well, what's the cure for that? Stop eating methamphetamine.
No, stop it.
Stop it.
Just very simple.
Drink
Stop
water,
it.
rest, eat food, and start living to exchange that desire that we have for thrill, for abundant life, and find it in reality, not in some artificial version of it. That's where mental health comes from that. And there are a lot of versions of this. Now, I'm not a mental health professional. I hire mental health professionals because it's important to have someone who understands what's the long-term effect of thinking right, of making good, healthy choices, life-giving, of pursuing spiritual, physical, life issues in a healthy way. And my confidence is, as we do that, and I've known literally hundreds of people who have gone from very mentally unstable to extremely mentally stable, but still that we're going to have our bad days. And so you have to remember, it's in this world, I'm going to have some testing. Some challenge. And I need to get through this patiently and not lash out and do something crazy to try to, because I can be crazy. I'll just admit it. I have mental health issues. I could do crazy things.
Well, if we have a mental, right?
Right,
then
we do. We have a mental one.
We have to keep it
These
in check.
functions, these are working. Yeah.
So balance seems
balance,
to be what you're talking about. You're
Balance
talking
and
about the
wisdom.
chemical balance between serotonin and dopamine, and then even in our own understanding,
Right.
understanding that we do have egos,
Right.
and yet as Christians, as disciples of Christ, as spiritual people, I think we also have to recognize that the spirit that dwells within us,
Right.
regardless of all the physiological effects and things around us, is in essence perfect. And it is that standard that we can reconnect to.
Yeah, I like
to
it.
faith.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Bill, for being with us, and thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time here on Joy in Our Town. God bless you. Hello, and welcome back to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host today, Deacon Adolfo Carbajal, and the topic that we're going to be discussing today revolves around health, specifically the health of children. And with us to discuss that issue is Dr. John Calcagno, pediatrician. Thank you, doctor, for taking time out of your busy schedule and coming here and helping illuminate our audience about many of these different issues.
Glad to do it. Absolutely.
We're sitting here on Christian television, and the plain knowledge for everyone is that we are embodied spirits. That means that our embodiment has a great effect on us.
Well, we have these bodies around us.
That's right. And sometimes our emotions and different things like that they're part of the embodiment, but not necessarily part of the spirit. You know, perhaps they're biological responses. You know, you hear stories about having people that have near-death experiences, and they'll all tell you that they have a great sense of peace. In other words, an absence of emotions.
Right.
But the emotions also affects our, I guess, our mental state. All right.
Yes.
So let's talk about children and the different difficulties that they have in many of these different areas.
Sure. Yeah, you know, Adolfo, the rise in mental illness in the world, you know, in America and the world has been dramatic. It's just amazing how we're seeing so many more people developing things like anxiety and depression and bipolar, mood disorders. You know, those are a reality of the 21st century. And we're not sure why, except for our fast-paced society and the fact that, you know, maybe we're not teaching our youth the right kind of things, the right kind of values, the right kind of coping skills. You know, so we're seeing this. We're seeing this dramatic increase in mental illness.
Well, it's obvious that we live in a much more complicated society today, hence our nice little communication devices here. Don't worry, I turned it off. But life is a lot more complicated. Could it be perhaps that maybe these different conditions have always existed in humanity, but because the situation was a lot slower paced and more simple or whatever, they didn't manifest themselves in that way?
You know, there's a lot of theories impacting that. I think the electronic revolution with, you know, the internet and cellular devices and you know, just computers in general have created a big piece of that. That people get so much more of their information and their entertainment and, you know, their emotional food, so to speak, from those sources. You know, if you go back prior to the 1970s, which is only 40 years ago, we didn't have any of those things. We had maybe a black and white television. That was it. You know, and I think also, you know, there's an old saying in medicine that states that nature abhors a void. Nature doesn't like a void. So I think as we've done a better job with injury prevention and illness prevention and, you know, societal support systems, that maybe that's a natural void where we're going to.
Where we're going to now, which brings up the point of perhaps self-esteem. One of those big issues that many children have to deal with. You see all these different programs in schools working on self-esteem. The media doesn't help any. We see all these fantasies of people's lives on Facebook and different things like that. The media. You have issues with childhood obesity or the opposite, which is anorexia, you know, because of that. So self-esteem is one of those issues.
Well, you know, John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy, was a brilliant guy, and one of the things he said was that everything we are, we are from childhood. So in those first 5 years of our life, so many of those constructs of our self-worth, our self-value, our personality traits are formed. And, you know, unfortunately, so much of that is from parents, from parenting. And I think that's where society has fallen down a notch in terms of not being helpful to young parents to recognize, you know, when that baby's crying at night, there's a reason, right? Don't yell at the baby. They don't want to cry. There's a reason for that. Or when that toddler, you know, breaks a glass or you know, something in the house, right? That's not as important as how that toddler feels in that moment. So I think there's things that we can do as a society to help to build that positive self-esteem from early on, because once they enter school, you know, schools unfortunately can be very hard, and that bullying, you know, bullying's been a big buzzword.
Middle schools.
Yeah, middle schools, right? The Diary of the Wimpy Kid stuff. I mean, that stuff is really real stuff. I have a middle schooler right now, and I recognize that. You know, he comes home oftentimes and talks about, you know, some kid that was mean or said something to other kids or did something that was very offensive. And as a family, it's important to families to talk about that stuff and build that strength, and that's where that spirituality comes in. You know, some people might say that the loss of spirituality, the decrease in church-going numbers, you know, less people that pray regularly, that's also created that void there.
I guess the diminished awareness of our spiritual selves. is part of that.
Right.
When you talk about, what I heard you saying is that those formative years of psychological development for a child is very important. We have the increase of single parents, breakup in marriages, all these different things that take place affect the children.
It's not easy.
but not to sound too fatalistic about it, does that mean that after the age of 4 or 5, I mean, your child is set in stone, and if you've gone through breaks up in marriages and relationship or chemical dependencies or different things like that during that time, what can be done afterwards?
Yeah.
Is there what steps can be taken to help children regain a sense of self-esteem?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and certainly, it's harder. And so after the age of 5, children are going to have constructs that are built in. There's a common term that's used in some circles called ghosts in the nursery, which are, things that babies are exposed to that stay in their brain that we don't even know they're exposed to. Loud noises, lightning at night, thunder, a dog barking, right? Things that just impact their self-construct or the way they look at the world. However, the other saying is that hope springs eternal, from the human breast. So I think that after the age of 5, and certainly in teenage years, and even as adults, we have the ability to change. We have to seek out that desire, that reason to change, and have the right tools and the right mentors. But absolutely, there's there's biblical stories and lots of good feel-good stuff out there about people that found God at the age of 20 or 30 or 40, and their life was changed.
Yeah, their lives were changed. They were able to overcome many of those different things. But it was a tough road before then.
You bet.
Well, I want to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to put you on the spot. We're going to do a little pop quiz with a pediatrician and see if we can explore some of these issues in a minute or less.
Great.
And that other question is, I'll give you an example. When I was in the Marine Corps, first of all, I was raised in the barrio, in the streets, scrapping and the whole 9 yards. And when I went into the Marine Corps, it seems that when we went overseas to different places, the places that we probably shouldn't be going, it seems that the Christian kids went absolutely nuts. It's as though they had never been exposed to any of these temptations, and when they were, they just fell right into it, big time.
Right.
Is perhaps overprotection of parents?
Sure, yeah. You do see that in certain isolated communities, and I won't mention those, but communities where, they are so fearful of the external influences, right, of society, of the drugs, the crime, the gangs, even the police, that they guard their children and their teenagers, young adults, to a point where they're not exposed to those things that are in the world. We are in the world. So unfortunately, when some of those young adults now go out into the world for the first time, it overwhelms them. I think it overwhelms them. It becomes a playground or a testing ground. I think Paul said it best in Romans, right? The famous verse about how, character and persistence and fighting the good fight. I think that starts at a very young age, being exposed, having the right mentorship, and being led along by good, godly people who hopefully can then build that muscle, that faith muscle, right?
Communication. Talk to your kids about, like that sign down the road of here, talk to your kids about marijuana.
Absolutely right.
Or about anything.
Yeah, and back to your original point of that question, I think that to me, what is the self-esteem, right? What is the definition of that, or how can you put that into a category or a bottle, right? And I think it goes to the self, right? The self is the embodiment of your spirit. It's who you are at your core. That's yourself, right? And that spirit is connected to God. Is connected directly to that God force. And that's where it's got to start. And then everything that builds on that is your humanly part, which when we die, that all goes away, and you're back to that.
And you're back to that. We are embodied spirits. So now let's, too bad we don't have any nice little game show music here, but let's go ahead and start with the very first one, all right?
All right.
So very quick, breastfeeding. Myths.
Right.
truths.
Truths, you bet. Yeah, unfortunately right now there's this huge push in the medical circles to have every baby breastfed. It started out with good intention, which is absolutely breast milk is what God designed for babies. It's got immunities, it's got antibodies, it's got the right calories, the right sugars, the right proteins, all those good things for babies. And so that was the beginning of it. And then the scientific community took that and said, oh, well then every baby needs to be breastfed. And unfortunately now the pendulum has swung too far to where even mothers who for some reason can't breastfeed or don't want to breastfeed, or there's issues that obviously can impact that, that they're being made to feel very bad about not being able to. And what's sprung up now is these human breast milk banks where people can donate breast milk and you can buy it and give it to your kid.
Good old capitalism.
Yeah.
Just kind of comes into play here, right?
Yeah.
So what about formulas? Can they be as healthy?
Baby formulas were invented for a reason. In my 30 years as a pediatrician, that was my line. That baby formulas were invented for a reason, and the specific reason is for babies that, for whatever reason, can't be breastfed. And they're fine. There's billions of dollars that have gone into the development of those formulas to make them as close to breast milk as possible. And that's as good as you're going to get.
Okay, all right, good. Let's go on to the next one. I'm going to time you on this one.
All right.
Let's talk about sugar.
Sugar, evil. In one word, evil. Back in the 1700s, right? Sugar was actually locked in chests and kept under guard when it was brought from the Orient, brought from Africa. Because the people who were delivering it knew that the sailors would do anything to get in there and eat that sugar. They considered it a drug. I mean, as much as cocaine. And so that's where sugar has an impact now on us human beings in our current world. That sugar is so widely available in so many foods and so easy to consume at overloads. You have 60% of the people in our society in America who are either overweight or obese. And it's not all sugar, but that certainly plays a huge role. Okay,
talking about sugar as a drug in 30 seconds or less.
Yes.
Let's talk about drug trends, marijuana use.
Yes, marijuana. Well, and as we know, Oregon is one of the states where marijuana is now legal. So if you're 21 years old, you can smoke marijuana legally, you can grow it, if you have a dispensary, you can sell it. I think it's here to stay. And from a godly perspective, I think that God put it on the planet for a reason. It does have some medicinal value. I think maybe it's a good thing that it's going to be regulated. And the states now are going to be able to watch closely where it comes from, who gets it, and there will be better laws to enforce that it's not being overused or not like other drugs that maybe are more harmful or damaging, like methamphetamines.
Well, thank you, Doctor, for being here with us today, and thank you for joining us.
Great.
Enjoying our town. We'll see you next time. God bless you all. Goodbye.